Did you hear about WPA2?
No.
It's dead!
Well, it's not quite dead, so let's rewind. WPA2 has been compromised but not killed, so don't rush back to wired equivalent protection just yet, but it might be worth avoiding Wi-Fi whenever possible. So what is WPA2? WPA and WPA2 are network security protocols commonly in use to secure home Wi-Fi networks that lack enterprise authorization servers. WPA2 is currently used to replace the WEP protocol and is the standard for most network security. The basic idea behind WPA and WPA2 is to have a pre-shared key with users and then use this key to connect to a network and initiate a four-way handshake between your device and the network. So are we doomed to a new world in which some big brother will be intercepting all our internet traffic? No, not really. There have been no attacks in the wild, nor has the exploit been released, although as of October 2017, it will be released soon. Vendors and OS distributors have been alerted to the exploit, and OpenBSD has already silently patched this exploit. So why is this attack so important? For starters, it impacts any device that uses WPA2 to connect to a Wi-Fi network, which is essentially most devices. Smartphones, laptops, and tablets are all affected. It also appears to be mostly OS agnostic. Windows, Apple, Linux, and more are all impacted. This exploit is exceptionally devastating against Linux and Android 6.0 Plus, which is important because currently over 30% of the Android device market runs Android 6.0 Plus. The one saving grace of this attack is that it's a locality-based attack, meaning attackers have to be within the range of your Wi-Fi network to exploit you, and having to be closer is going to make it harder for the attackers to exploit. Furthermore, it targets the third handshake, which is a message sent from the access point to the client device. So it'll be important to update your laptops, cell phones, and anything else that uses Wi-Fi in the coming months. Now that we understand why this exploit is an important matter, let's try and figure out how it works. For a description more detailed than the one we give in this video, check out the link provided. A nuance, also called an initialization vector, is just a word used only once. This is important because each message must have a different nuance so no two words share the same key. Stick with me for a second because this might get a little heavy. WPA2 is generally implemented with a block cipher encryption algorithm such as AES with either CCM, GCM, or even TKIP mode. Since the nuance of one of these modes must be chosen to never be used more than once for a given key, the encryption algorithm effectively becomes a stream cipher. TKIP mode was deprecated in 2009 and is essentially an RC4 stream cipher, which makes it vulnerable to attacks similar to those used against WEP. CCM and GCM mode are secure as long as a nuance isn't repeated. A stream cipher uses the preceded segment of data to produce the nuance for the next bit of data. If we know what the nuance will be, an obvious attack is to simply reuse the same key and nuance. WPA2, according to the 802.11i specification, attempts to prevent these types of attack by constructing each nuance with a packet number counter. This gets initialized to 0 when you start a session and always increments up. This should, in theory, prevent any nuance reuse provided the packet number counter never gets reset. As we mentioned earlier, WPA2 uses what's known as a four-way handshake between the access point and the client. This is responsible for deriving the encryption key. This handshake takes place when a client wants to connect to a protected Wi-Fi network and is used to confirm that both the client and access point have the correct credentials. At the same time, the handshake generates a fresh encryption key to use for encrypting the subsequent traffic. In particular, the recent exploit, dubbed Krack, utilizes what is known as a key reinstallation attack on the third handshake, hence the name Krack. This is where the handshake generates the nuance and increments the counter number. In this attack, the adversary tricks the client into reinstalling a key that's already in use. This is achieved by blocking the acknowledgement of the third handshake to the access point and retransmitting the third handshake. Due to a mistake in how the protocol was designed, the retransmission causes the client to reset the key state. This leads to reusing the nuance and opens the door to the decryption of traffic. On Windows and Mac, the packet number gets set to 0, the nuance never changes, and the key gets set to some default value. On BSD, Linux, and Android, the nuance and the packet number get set to 0, and the key defaults to 0. In this situation, an attacker doesn't need to know what your Wi-Fi password is to eavesdrop on your TCP traffic. In order to prevent this attack, both the access point and the client need to be updated. This is especially problematic because many devices never get updated, especially old and inexpensive Android phones. To see this exploit in action, let's check out a demo and see how it could be used in a not-so-friendly manner. Here we see Matthew Van Hoop, the founder of the exploit, perform the attack against an Android device. The Android device connects to the WPA2 network where no adversary is present. We can see Van Hoof utilizing a Python script that contains the exploit. Note that the target and the network the target is on are specified. The tool searches for the network you plan on attacking and creates a clone of it that is used for manipulating handshake messages. Now, the Android device connects to Wi-Fi and is tricked into connecting to the clone that was set up. This allows you to manipulate messages and conduct the key reinstallation as a man in the middle. Van Hoof shows us how intercepting and decrypting internet traffic is trivial once you have reset the key and nuance to the default of zeros on Android. Here we see that a username and password were intercepted. So who's to blame for this Wi-Fi clown fiesta? Dr. Matthew Green at Johns Hopkins wrote a great article on the WPA exploit that got me thinking about this question. If you're interested in learning about the exploit without getting into the nitty-gritty, I would check out his blog. There's two parties that seem to be considered in this blame game: the people who produce the specifications, which is IEEE in this case, and the implementers of said spec. We could spend all day gathering opinions on the internet, but personally I don't put too much trust in anonymous internet comments. Instead, let's take a look at what the authors of the exploit's publication have to say. Maybe we can get some ideas about what went wrong. According to the publication on the exploit, it seems that the specification has some major oversights in the four-way handshake. The state machine described by the specification defines the retransmission of message 3 by the access point in the case that there is no reply. This is one of the most important vulnerabilities in the exploit. Even more, the spec states that the client should install the key after processing and replying to message 3, which produces the side effects resulting in the resetting of the nuances. Still convinced the condemnation of the spec is harsh? Well, consider this. The Wi-Fi clients which have not properly implemented the state machine defined in the IEEE spec, specifically Windows and iOS, are the least vulnerable to the exploit. They don't allow retransmissions of message 3 and avoid the key reinstallation in that way. Seems fishy to me, dude. But wait, what about the formal proofs showing that the spec was secure? Dr. Green brings up a really good point in his piece. Proofs were carefully constructed for the handshake and encryption protocols. The proofs looked at the two protocols, but not at the protocols as they work together. So why wasn't the conjunction of the two protocols verified? I don't know. Why don't you do it? In actuality, it's just plain hard, and problems like this bring to the forefront the need for verification systems that use modern technology instead of relying on us humans. You know what? That's alright, spec writers. We're all just human. Everyone makes mistakes. But in order for these mistakes to get fixed in a more timely fashion, it would help if the specs produced by IEEE were more readily available to anyone who might be interested. So the creators of the spec are to blame. You can't really forget about the implementers though. At the end of the day, they create the product and shouldn't be blindly implementing a state machine from a spec without thinking about the implications. Some of the Wi-Fi clients even implemented the worst case scenario, resetting to an all-zero key upon the replay of message 3. Regardless of who's to blame, it's important we know how to avoid becoming a victim to the exploit. So as a developer in charge of implementing the Wi-Fi stack on a device, how can you protect your devices from the Krack attack? First is to be sure you keep your devices patched and updated, especially if your device's operating system doesn't auto-update, such as Chromium. Van Hoof has identified two layers at which OS vendors and developers can mitigate the attack. First, the implementation of WPA2 should check whether the key that's trying to be installed is also currently the one being used. And if so, the implementation should not reset the nuances or replay counters, thus preventing the attack. However, this only works if the attacker doesn't trick the target into installing a different older key before reinstalling the present key. The attack becomes more difficult but can still be accomplished by installing an old key. Then the current key can be reinstalled provided the implementation only validates against the currently used key. A better solution involves making sure that no previous or currently used key is installed more than once. This can be done by adding a Boolean value to the state machine currently on your screen. If you'd like to figure this out and prove it yourself, I'd recommend pausing the video here. No, seriously, we're about to continue on. If you didn't solve it for yourself, we initialize the Boolean to false, then at the pairwise transient key start, set it to true when generating the new key. If the Boolean is true when we get to the done stage, we set the Boolean to false. If it's already false when we get to done, you don't install the key. You can also help to mitigate Krack attacks as a web developer. This can be done by utilizing HTTP Strict Transport Security, or HSTS. HSTS is a web server directive that informs user agents and web browsers how to handle the connection. It does this through a response header. HSTS forces those connections over HTTPS encryption, disregarding any script's request to load a resource over HTTP. Using HSTS is just one option from a wide variety of strategies for securing your website. As an everyday Wi-Fi user, there are some security techniques you can use to further protect yourself as well. Not only are these good crack attack mitigation strategies, they're good security practices in general. By adding security layers on top of WPA2, we can make it that much more difficult for an attacker to break through. First, let's talk about HTTPS. The lock and secure symbol on the left side of your browser search bar indicates the site you're using is secure, or in other words, it's using HTTPS. This means your traffic is encrypted between you and whoever it's destined for. HTTPS was designed to work over an untrusted channel such as Wi-Fi with no encryption, or even Wi-Fi networks with broken encryption, WPA2. Sorry about that. So as long as you don't ignore HTTPS certification warnings, you can safely browse the cyberwebs. One great tool for making sure you're using HTTPS is the HTTPS Everywhere extension. Check it out if you're feeling extra paranoid after watching this video. As a general rule, just be sure that if you're transmitting sensitive info over the internet, you're doing so while using HTTPS. Now let's talk about using virtual private networks, or VPNs. A VPN ensures that before your traffic gets to its final destination, it's routed through a virtual network to another machine that gives it internet access. The reason this is more secure is that even on your own personal network, all your internet traffic on the VPN will be hidden by another layer of encryption. Services such as private internet access provide you with VPNs for around $3 a month and can allow you to visit websites that might be blocked by another network. The website on the other end never sees where the connection originated from either. It might also be a good idea to avoid using home file sharing services for now, as they aren't usually protected. They normally don't require a password, and the security of the networking protocols they use are highly variable. Finally, remember to check for updates from any device that connects to the internet. Security cameras, thermostats, tablets, watches, and whatever else you might have.